This is English shorthand dictation number 162 and the dictation speed is 140 words per minute. Ready? Start. Mr. President, the budget discussion has gone on for a long period and I feel that all that could have been said has already been said. It would have been better for a new member like me to keep silent. But I feel that there is a point of view which has not yet been placed before this House, and as I represent that point of view, I think it is my duty to give expression to it. Mr. President, when one begins to criticize the budget, one is at the outset overcome with a feeling of helplessness, for the range of effective criticism is indeed very small. The total estimated expenditure as given in this budget is something like 36%. The total estimated revenue of this presidency is rupees 15 crores, and out of this about rupees 9 crores is being levied by the executive without the consent of this council. I refer to the land revenue and excise revenue. So taking both of the expenditure and revenue into consideration, I think it is fair to say that the criticism which one has to make is indeed very limited, because the council can only deal with 64% of the expenditure and 40% of the revenue. But taking the things as they are, I proceed to offer such remarks as I am capable of making. Commencing with the revenue side of the budget, I wish to deal with it in the first place from the standpoint of the Honorable Finance Member, and secondly from the standpoint of the taxpayers. The Honorable Finance Member will agree with me when I say that the first and most essential requirement of a good revenue system is that it should be reliable. It does not matter whether that revenue system brings in large revenue or small revenue, but whatever it brings, it ought to be certain in its yield. Judging the revenue side from this standpoint, I find that the land revenue, which is the largest item in the budget, is capable of a variation of something like 50 lakhs. If you take excise, the second largest source of revenue, you find that since the inception of the reforms, it has shown a variation of rupees 73 lakhs. I therefore invite the attention of my friend, the Honorable Finance Member, to consider the consequences that would follow if these two items in the revenue system varied in the same direction. If they did, then I think they will land him into a ditch of more than rupees 1 crore. I do not know whether such a system of revenue is a system on which the Honorable Finance Member should rely, but it is for him to see that and not for me, because he is in charge of the finances of this country. Now, taking the same items of revenue into consideration and judging them from the standpoint of the taxpayers, I think the revenue system of this presidency is inequitable and indefensible. Take first of all the land revenue. Whatever may be the quibbles, whether it is tax or whether it is rent, I may say that there is no doubt that this land revenue is a tax on the profits of the businessman. If these two levies are the same, I want to know from the Honorable Finance Member as to why there should be difference in the methods of levying the two. Every farmer, whatever may be his income, is brought under the levy of the land tax. But under the income tax, no person is called upon to pay the tax if he has not earned any income during the year. That system does not exist as far as land revenue is concerned. Whether there is a failure of crops or abundance of crop, the poor agriculturist is called upon to pay the revenue. The income tax is levied on the recognized principle of ability to pay. But under the land revenue system, a person is taxed at the same rate, whether he is an owner of 1 acre of land or a jagirdar. He has to pay the tax at the same rate, It is a proportionate tax and not a progressive tax as it ought to be. Again, under the income tax, holders of income below a certain minimum are exempted from levy. But under the land revenue, the tax is remorselessly collected from everyone, be he rich or poor. Take again the excise. This is an item from which a large revenue is derived. There can be no two opinions that this is public legal monopoly. This was not meant for the purpose of enabling the government to raise revenue, but the monopoly was enacted because the government would be in a better position to put a stop to demoralization of the people by spread of the habit of drink. If collection of revenue is the only aim, there is no necessity for a government monopoly. How has this monopoly been managed by the government? If you take the figures as to how much the people of each presidency spent in drinking, you will find that the Bombay presidency stands first so far as the drinking habit is concerned. The government has accepted the policy of prohibition and has adopted certain measures for carrying out that policy to fruition, but they have not done so. The first of such measures is rationing. I understand that a second measure adopted for carrying the policy of prohibition to fruition was the appointment of an advisory committee. But I have found that 40% of the composition of this advisory committee is composed of anti-prohibitionists. I do not think the government benches are treating this council with respect, which is its due. Mr. President, while I am speaking about the financial system of this country, I think it is fair to suggest to my honorable friend, the finance member, that the prosperity of the people is the greatest patrimony of the state. He should not demoralize them, or he should not beggar them. A state that beggars its people ends in beggaring itself. Mr. President, I next want to speak of irrigation and civil works. I think I will be wasting my time in giving details, but I do want to say one thing, that when the government undertakes a certain industry or work, it does it primarily for revenue, or it does it primarily for service, though incidentally for revenue, or it may be that it does it primarily for service. I do not think that the government has any defined or definite policy with regard to the services it has undertaken. For instance, I personally feel that the irrigation department is not giving us the full return that we are entitled to get from them. I think if my honorable friend refers to the Taxation Inquiry Committee's report, he will find that the water rate is very low. I think we on this side of the house are entitled to expect from him better husbanding of the resources of this presidency. Mr. President, I now turn to the expenditure side of this budget. I know most members of this house are alarmed at the deficit. I may say I am not. Deficit is not something which ought to alarm honorable members. What has disquieted me is that the deficit in the budget is not due to any inclusion of a large policy of social advancement. The deficit is entirely due to the increase in cost on the non-productive charges of the administration. The Secretary of the Finance Department was yesterday very wise in telling the House to be reasonable. He said that if the honorable members of this House desire that they should be taken seriously by the government benches, they should be reasonable. Mr. President, I admit the force of that argument, but I want to send the argument back to him. and ask him whether the increase in expenditure that has taken place in this presidency is reasonable and can be justified on the ground of increase of the administrative quality. I do think that the cost of general administration in this presidency has been very heavy. In fact, it had no justification even from past history of this presidency. For instance, we have today 4 executive councillors and 3 ministers, and we have under them secretaries and deputy secretaries numbering about 25 or so.